Hi everyone, welcome again to a new edition of for the Research Consortium. And today we're going to talk about the different traditions of qualitative research and the methodologies. For this, I'm going to follow the guidance of John Creswell, and I'm going to be using his third edition of the book Qualitative Inquiry and Research Designed, Choosing Among Five Traditions. This is a textbook. Before I begin, I want to let you know that like in any field, changes have taken place. Um, Creswell also is someone who has somewhat changed his mind, and he goes from traditions in the previous editions to define this set of methodologies to now call them approaches. And briefly, in in a simple manner to explain that, it shows that qualitative tradition is evolving, but at the same time, as it is evolving and becoming more sophisticated and more widely accepted, at the same time, people change their mind in terms of what they believe is correct or incorrect, appropriate or inappropriate. Previously, Creswell had the idea, like many people, that there were specific groups or sets of methodologies and they were completely independent from each other. Therefore, because they also at the same time they came from a specific disciplines, or they were characteristic of a certain groups of professionals, there were traditions. Anthropologists did ethnography. Philosophers might want to do all phenomenology. People in certain areas of postmodernist area, they would like to do narrative inquiry. Individuals who wanted to do more of something closer to quantitative and still in the realm of qualitative, they use grounded theory, something concrete, an element and a model that resembles somewhat the paradigm of quantitative. However, as all these methodologies have become more widely used, somewhat people have adapted them to different needs or different research questions. The result is that there's more mixture. Just like in counseling and psychology, we have psychoanalysis, we have humanistic counseling, and many other traditions and approaches. However, nowadays most psychologists or therapists will define themselves as eclectic. They borrow from different traditions and they see the needs of the client or the situation in which they are, and because of that, while they may have been trained even in some areas or some specific methodologies or theories, they describe their career, their practice as eclectic. That's something similar in qualitative research. While there are certain methodologies that are very clearly defined and are still widely used in certain groups of professionals, somewhat is changing that. The other explanation that may be added here is that there is a new trend within qualitative research, and it has to do with the concept of interpretivism. Qualitative research emerges and it becomes widely popular through the constructive paradigm. The constructive paradigm indicates that people construct their reality based on language, and language itself can names reality, transforms reality, and as we interact with other people, we can transform the reality, change the reality that we perceive to be experiencing. Whereas in interpretivism, and for that I use Crotty, refers to the notion that individuals interpret a reality and give meaning to the reality based on the sources that they have. They give meaning to something. So it's not necessarily just like I talk with you and you talk with me and we come out with something, or I learn from the way you name reality and I acquire that language to name the experience that I'm having. That would be kind of the constructive paradigm. But what rather in the interpretivist paradigm or approach, individuals give meaning to an experience, and sometimes they change that experience based on the interpretation they make of those experiences. At the same time, other people look at an experience and may interpret that experience in a completely different way. And that's kind of the new trend that we have now in qualitative research. Going back now to Creswell, we'll discuss again the five most common approaches to qualitative research that we have today. But what is qualitative research to begin with? The new thing about qualitative research is that it provides us an opportunity to deepen our understanding of a human lived experience. And while there are parameters, standards, and characteristics for each one of the traditions that we may encounter in qualitative research, we have to be very cautious on not falling into what has been called the methodolatry, to idolize a certain methodology and become absolutely purist. That is, to approach every single problem from a phenomenological point of view, or to approach every single problem from a grounded theory approach. But rather, we need to suit the question, the research question. Just like Max van Manen indicates, the research question is what leads the qualitative research approach. At the same time, the methodology that we choose must be chosen not necessarily based on the training that we receive or the knowledge that we have, but rather the question, the research question, must be our guiding uh, path. It is true, just like Van Mane indicates, that our preferences as well as the training that we have received in certain specific approaches somewhat will determine or influence the way we approach qualitative research or a research question. That is absolutely true. Therefore, we have to be very cautious, that qualitative research can be done in multiple ways. An individual can see a problem that while can agree with many other people that it may be approached or should be approached through a qualitative approach, they may do it in an anthropological manner, that will be ethnographically, or they may do it through a phenomenological approach if they have been trained in philosophy or psychology. They might do it as a case study if that they think that it fits best. So we have to be aware that while our preferences and our training will lean us towards a certain methodological approach, we have to always honor the question, the research question that leads us, motivates us to do research. And that's the first postulate. It is important to understand that the classification of qualitative research changes based on different authors and different scholars. I lean towards Creswell for the easiness of the taxonomy that he presents and the wide spectrum of scholars and practitioners that support such basic division. One of the things that we need to understand at the same time, second postulate, is the value of philosophy. Most certainly, most people have not been trained in philosophy, and they may see philosophy as something very far-fetched from their study. For instance, how do children learn in kindergarten when those children are first generation Latino immigrants? Or maybe what is it like for a woman to go through divorce in her 50s? Or you can think about what is it like for Latino students to be peer mentored by other Latino students in a research in a higher education research institution. So if these questions certainly are qualitative and they're very concrete about daily life, we have to always keep in mind that philosophy is at the foundation of qualitative research. And why philosophy not necessarily refers to Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and all the great philosophers. It refers intrinsically to the understanding of a human problem and going deeper into that problem, providing a possible interpretation of that problem. So it's not just about reporting what people say, and it's not about collecting, important or paramount quotations or phrases for participants, or collecting items or objects if you're doing an ethnographic study about a site. It is about finding meaning, providing an interpretation that not only refers to those who are participants of a qualitative study, or with whom you participate if you're part of the study as well, but rather how that touches the human essence of every human being. A qualitative study is not only something that is geographically, temporarily, physically, and corporally, referring now to the four basic fundamentals of existentialism, but it also has to do with the essence of a human being. What makes a human being be? And then in reference to the phenomenon that you're studying. Therefore, philosophy is an intrinsic aspect of qualitative research. The third aspect of qualitative research that, before going into these traditions, that we need to consider is a concept that has been somewhat discussed, but sometimes it tends to be forgotten, and it refers to the concept of problematization. Problematization refers to, and I quote from Michael Crotty, the Foundation of Social Research, refers to the notion of going deeper in multiple layers towards the understanding of a problem, of a human experience. A human experience not start with a problem that is problematic, but rather complex and multi-layered. That would be the third postulate. Problematization is not just necessarily to say what something is and what something possibly means, but going into different layers for the different participants and the different aspects of that phenomenon. So there is a difference between a problem and a problematization. A problem is something that requires to be solved. It's something that demands an answer. Period. Problematization is something far more complex, and it's a philosophical approach. A philosophical approach that, one more time, makes us ponder upon the human experience of an individual, what an experience refers. And by understanding that experience in multiple layers, temporarily, physically, and context, and other aspects of it, we become aware of the meaning of that experience for that person, and how that experience with those characteristics may also tap into the experiences of other human beings. Conscientization refers to an awakening, a wider awareness of a reality how it is experienced by those individuals that we are studying with. So that has to be into account. So we produce at the end, and this is always the result of a qualitative study, a written text. A text that speaks to a reader about a human lived experience. As closely as possible, those human beings have lived that experience, how they interpret that experience, and how they communicate that experience. So the language that we use in a written text not only has to be in terms of reporting of an experience, but also interpreting an experience in a deeper layer, and borrowing at the same time both language from the participants, those who interview, those we observe, and those with whom we engage in conversation, and we transcribe those conversations to pull out the most essential elements of those, significant elements of those experiences or experience that we're studying. But at the same time, we conjoin those meanings, those words, those expressions, those phrases to philosophy. And not necessarily just the classical philosophy as we tend to think about that, but the philosophy that interprets and provides awareness or conscientization is a difficult word, to us. Paulo Freire discussed that, and he thought that individuals do not progress, do not evolve unless they're fully conscious of their experience. And by being fully conscious, not necessarily means to be able to see something or describe something and then stop there, but also the conscientization that we receive must be always conjoined to action, an action that leads us towards the change of one experience that we are having when it refers to oppression, or in the case of the qualitative research, empowering those individuals to be able to describe their experience, whether it's oppressive or liberating, so others who may read eventually the outcome of the qualitative research, which is always a written text, be able to collaborate with those individuals, participate with those individuals, so they can also emancipate, liberate, free those who are suffering from oppression, suffering from some form of restriction, or they haven't reached conscientization yet. Their capacity to understand the situation in which they are and to receive the tools, linguistic tool and social tool, that allows them to free themselves. In terms of the different approaches to doing qualitative research, as Creswell talks about, essentially he talks about 5 of them, and these 5 of them refer to classical formats of that. The first one that he talks about is, in his approach here, he talks about let's start with grounded theory. Grounded theory has multiple characteristics, but most importantly, it's a study that produces a model, a design model that explains the evolution or the stages of a human experience, whether it is how women survive rape, how Latino students graduate from college when they are non-traditional, when they have no college tradition, how do African Americans achieve high positions of power in administration within the private sector. A grounded theory will allow the researcher not only to show these individuals and to show them where they are, but more likely what were the stages that these individuals went through the process until they reach those moments in their lives. At the same time, the researcher understands a process that leads toward action. And interestingly enough, in grounded theory, it's not just necessarily to use a system like a ruler. From second is after one, third is after second, fourth comes after third, and is before fifth, but rather to see this evolution as a process. As all human process, individuals can move forward and backward. And not everybody in every process starts from the very beginning. For some human beings, stage 1 and 2 may be very almost conjoined perhaps. They can just go all together and very quickly, whereas some individuals in stage 3 or 4 may take a very long time and may require a very specific condition, situation, and hence for them to move to a higher level. On some of the cases, some individuals may stagnate in certain stages and never reach to level 5. But in a grounded theory, the researcher is intending to produce a model that would explain, not only explain to those participants how their evolution or process has been, but at the same time to the reader through the written text. Again, qualitative research is always about written text. So the written text of how these stages are, how these stages what the characteristics of those stages are, and how each stage differentiates from each other. There is a certain degree of arbitrarity in the sense of what stages one research creates may not be the same stages as another researcher may create. The important thing here is that each stage has a rationale, and a rationale has the foundations and the proper backup, both from the information collected from the participant as well as the available literature to determine those stages. So while there is a certain degree of arbitrarity, at the same time there is a certain degree of normality or normalization in terms of the stages that any researcher may propose. Characteristics of grounded theory is in terms of the data analysis. We don't analyze data just to interpret the data or to find meaning in the data, but rather to create a diagram, a design, or a model. So it's important, what is the purpose of analyzing this data? Is it just finding the most important words? Not really. Is it important the main stories? Not really. It's the functionality of those stories, those words, those concepts, those connotations or denotations that the participants provide us that allow us to the construction of the model. Quite contrary now to a case study. Moving now onto the case study. A case study will look at a human lived experience, but it's for one individual, two individuals, a group of individuals, or individuals within a setting, looking at the experience as a system. How those individuals or those experiences or that setting functions as a system and or creates a system, like a classroom, for instance. How do students in Dr. John's mathematics class are able to obtain the highest score in a test? A principal may be very interested in Dr. Jones' class because Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Perez's classes, the results of their tests are not the same. But constantly, Dr. Johnson produces the best results with their students. So something must be going on in that class. Could be the pedagogy of the professor, could be the type of students that the professor or the teacher or professor obtained, could be the classroom setting and the facilities, could be the schedule in which those classes take place that make a difference for those students compared to the other students. So what is it in that particular setting, in that particular system, that better results in certain tests are produced? That would be an example of a case study. Another example of a case study is how counseling clients respond to the use of cognitive therapy in a setting that deals with substance abuse for individuals who are at the same time in later stages of their life. Something is being done with those participants on a permanent basis in a particular setting and for a particular type of diagnosis. How does it work? Does it really work? What would work? How does it work? And if it works, what are the things that make that work well for them at that time in their life with that particular diagnosis? That would be an example. So when we interview those people, when we observe those participants, when we transcribe those conversations, the meanings that we're trying to extract for them is to understand the system. Perhaps that understanding of that system can allow us to replicate that in the future, or perhaps it allows us to maintain the system as it is. If I were the supervisor of that counseling center, if that's going to work, I want to ensure that the characteristics of what has made this program work, or this approach work, or this particular population be served in the best possible way, maintain those characteristics, maintain that system as it functions well, and not take elements or change the elements that may alter the positive outcome that we have been able to identify if it works. And if it does not work, to identify the elements that are clearly distinguishable, not making the system work, or making not function the system as it should be. Therefore, in case study, we deal with the system, how the different components, and it's up to the researcher and the research question to identify the components that needs to be considered, taken into account, and specified to identify that concept. Another example would be, how does a service learning experience within a multicultural class helps the participant, in this case graduate students of counseling, understand social justice? Usually, service learning experience is a component of a social, as from a multicultural for a multicultural class, and usually that's something that is typically done, particularly in kick-up accredited program. But does it help? We all believe that it helps. We have the principles that individuals should be practitioners of social justice. But if it works, how does it work? Is it our enthusiasm? Is our desire? Is the textbooks that they read? Is the reading assignments that make them read conscientization? Is it the participants' willingness, openness, or personal characteristic that leans them towards the service of social justice? Is it the population that they work with that allows them to reach this conscientization, that allows them to at the same time understand social justice and the value of it, and continue using as part of a principle of their personal private practice and general practice as professionals of counseling in the future? That's another example of a case study. Another approach that we can discuss here is ethnography. Ethnography, it's very extensive and demanding. Ethnography requires a long investment of time of the researcher within a cultural setting. While a case study is looking at a system, components of a system, whether these are human beings, meaning making, processes, system, readings, an ethnographic study looks at an experience as a cultural manifestation of a human being. Human beings make culture, sustain culture, communicate culture. And by culture refers to traditions, customs, habits, language, food, etc., etc. So all that we do is somehow a cultural manifestation. Manifestation that may be sustained throughout time or may fade away as we receive other influences, or we stop believing on those values that makes us behave, talk, act, or preserve certain traditions. An ethnographer is looking at human experience as a cultural manifestation. And as a cultural manifestation, he's trying to understand the value of those manifestations and how those manifestations are sustained and acquire value and become traditions within the community they want to study. An ethnographer going to a classroom trying to investigate how a class works is not interested just on the element that makes something work, but rather understand the class from the inside, to understand the class, how the participants, the students who go to a class, going back to the example that I gave before, learn. And by learning, they perform better in tests. If I'm an ethnographer and go to a classroom, I'm not just looking at the classroom as a system or a system with a larger system, which is the school, but I'm looking at the classroom as a cultural center where culture is created, maintained, and sustained by the teacher, by the system, by the rules, by the language, by the format of the class, by the texts, the organization of content, the methodology of teaching, etc. Ethnography requires all elements to be part of the understanding of the cultural manifestation of a setting at a certain time as well. So while we are looking for meaning in case study, we're looking for meaning in grounded theory, we're looking for meaning in an ethnographic study, the objectives at the end of each one of these approaches is different, and how the explanation for the human experience will be different. Moving on to the next approach, and that would be narrative inquiry. Narrative inquiry is becoming far and far more popular nowadays and more commonly used nowadays, and maybe is the fact that narrative inquiry is addressing the stories of people. Individuals want to have their stories told. They want to show how an experience has shaped the way they think, the way they perceive an experience, and the way that experience has affected them and determines the behavior that they have at this moment, predisposing them to accept, deny, feel heard, feel loved, feel accepted, or feel distance from others. Narrative inquiry also validates the multiplicity of the meaning making process of an experience. While a group of people can be members of one family unit, each member of the family, through narrative inquiry, will have the opportunity to tell the version of the story of the family in which they are living. Narrative inquiry validates each version of it by describing it and giving voice to each participant. So there are two outcomes of a narrative inquiry: the understanding of each participant's story in many making of a process, or maybe finding the common threads that join all these individuals in different roles, let's say within a family, within a class, or within a group, towards a commonality of understanding of an experience. Narrative inquiry will not only tell us in a chronological order what something has been told, but rather how every person at different stages in their own persona have made sense of the experience that they're having. A first-born child, while sharing the same father and mother that is a second or third born child within a family, may perceive the family demands completely different from second or the youngest one. A mother may perceive her role within the family completely different from her children's and from her husband. Therefore, the expectation that if she believes or the members of the family believe she may have in their household may be completely different from what she perceives them to be. A father may perceive his role as a father completely different from what his children see him he should be when they were 5, when they were 10, when they're 16. While all of them are living in the same house, attending the same school, speaking the same language, and even when they have been born in the same country. Imagine how difficult it would be, when children have been born in one country and the parents were born in another country, and all of them have moved a couple of times to different states. Therefore, the experience that they may have as they grow up could be quite different from each other in how they have experienced, perceived, or felt those experiences. Narrative inquiry is a very good approach if you are trying to find the meaning and perhaps identify how come members of the same group, such as a family, may have such a different approach to the moment in life that they are living. Lastly, choosing phenomenology perhaps can be one of the most challenging undertakings in terms of the linguistic approach. Phenomenology, some scholars like Marion says, every kind of qualitative research is phenomenological in nature because it's philosophical. It describes a human lived experience, to which is often referred as phenomenon. While all forms of qualitative research have their own sets of language choices in terms of words, approaches, and meaning-making forms, phenomenology may be one of the most distancing of all, given the fact that it is intrinsically philosophical, but at the same time has one of the largest lexicons. As a philosophical approach, phenomenology has a large set of words that are unique: epocha, bracket, phenomenon, just to name a few items, lexical items, that are unique to this approach and that allow the researcher to name language, meaning making process, and methods, how to make meaning of a human lived experience. The essences in a phenomenological approach, the objective of a phenomenological approach is to find the essential component that make an experience be what it is, and without which that experience would not be what it is. What is it to be a college student for a first generation Latino student in a public research institution? What is unique? A phenomenologist will go and interview this individual until he understands everything about his life. But essentially, what are the basic things that all together make him feel a Latino student, first generation in a research institution, and without which that not would be that experience? Not necessarily to stay in the stages, to find a system in which, but the essence of an experience. So if an experience is unknown, or is somewhat known halfway through, phenomenology is an excellent means to really understand essentially what does it mean to be that person, what does it mean to be like that. And the typical question of phenomenological research is, what is it like? And by like, we talk about a description. Phenomenology, as the other approaches, have multiple manifestations and developments, but there are two classical. The first one is the descriptive phenomenological approach, and the second one is the interpretative or um, approach, the hermeneutic approach, in which not only I describe an experience, but provide an interpretation of the meaning for that experience for that individual and individuals like that. So in summary, here you have the postulates that I indicated before, plus the 5 different approaches that are traditionally used in qualitative research. Keep in mind again, qualitative research is intrinsically philosophical, and is intrinsically a description and often also an interpretation of the human experience. It's beyond reporting, it's beyond condensation, and it's beyond the description of a model. It is the understanding of a human experience as the participants attempt to explain that to us, and for us it is the best possible way that we may have to explain that experience and show that experience as we have been entrusted by the participants to share their experience. Have a good time, enjoy the journey that qualitative research offers to all of you. And as Van Manen says, it's not just what qualitative research does, but what qualitative research does for the researcher that may be the most fulfilling aspect of pursuing this type of inquiry. Thank you. Have a good day. This is Dr. Gomez and Argos University. Thank you.